The Velthari Empire stretched across 1,000 star systems, and every single one of them trembled when they heard the news the Princess Alicia was dying. Emperor Cathvarus stood at the window of the royal medical chamber, his tall, elegant form casting a long shadow across the polished obsidian floor as he watched his only child fade away like a star losing its fire. The Velthari were beings of living light, their bodies glowing with bioluminescent energy that pulsed beneath their crystalline skin, and the royal bloodline glowed brightest of all. But now the princess lay in her bed with her light flickering like a candle in a storm. She was only 8 cycles old, barely more than a child by Velthari standards, and she had been the joy of the entire empire until 6 months ago when everything changed. The Empress had died suddenly, taken by an accident during a diplomatic voyage to the Outer Rim, and the entire empire had mourned for the required 3 days before returning to their duties as was proper and logical. But the princess had not returned to normal, and day by day her glow had grown weaker until now she could barely open her eyes. The emperor turned to face the gathered healers, his expression hard as stone, even though something deep inside him wanted to scream and rage against the universe for taking everything he loved. "Report," he commanded in a voice that allowed no argument. Archon Seleth, the royal physician and the most respected healer in all the empire, stepped forward and bowed his head low before speaking. "Your Imperial Majesty, we have tried everything known to Velthari medicine, and I must confess that we are no closer to understanding what afflicts the princess than we were when this began." The emperor's eyes flashed with cold anger as he gestured toward the other healers in the room. "I summoned the greatest medical minds from across the galaxy, and you tell me that none of you can save one small child?" The crystalline surgeons of Nexer Prime had come first, their bodies made of living gemstone that could reshape itself into any tool needed for most delicate procedures. But they had found nothing wrong with the princess that their instruments could detect. The psychic menders of the Thought Collective had arrived next, beings who existed partially in another dimension and could reach into the minds of their patients to heal trauma and damage. But when they touched the princess's consciousness, they had recoiled in confusion. There was something there, their speaker had said, but it is not an illness we recognize, and it exists in a place our powers cannot reach. The bioengineers of the Synthetic Accord had been the Emperor's last hope, masters of genetic manipulation who could rebuild a body cell by cell if needed. But even they had admitted defeat. "Her body is perfect," they have reported, "and there is no disease, no infection, no degradation of any kind. Yet she fades nonetheless." The Emperor slammed his fist against the wall, and the sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Then what is killing my daughter?" he demanded. Archon Seleth hesitated before answering, his own glow dimming slightly with the shame of his failure. "We do not know, Your Majesty, and that is the truth we must face. For whatever afflicts the princes exists beyond our understanding of medicine and biology." The Emperor walked slowly to his daughter's bedside and looked down at her small, pale form, remembering how she used to run through the palace gardens laughing and glowing so bright that she lit up. The night now she barely breathed, and her light was so faint he could hardly see it. "Leave us," he commanded, and the healers filed out of the room in silence, none of them daring to look back at their emperor in his moment of despair when he was alone. Ketpharos did something he had not done in centuries, and he reached down to take his daughter's hand in his own. Her skin was cold, and that frightened him more than any enemy fleet or political crisis ever had. "What is happening to you, little one?" he whispered, knowing she could not hear him in the council chamber the next morning. The Emperor's advisors gathered to discuss what could be done, and the atmosphere was heavy with fear and uncertainty. "We have contacted every advanced civilization in the known galaxy," reported the Minister of External Affairs. and none of them have encountered an illness like this before. Perhaps it is not an illness at all, suggested the Minister of Science, but some kind of attack, a weapon designed to target the royal bloodline. The room erupted in worried murmurs at this possibility. But Archon Salith shook his head. We have scanned for every known form of biological and energy-based weapon, and there is no evidence of any external attack on the princess. The Emperor sat on his throne in silence, his mind racing through every option and finding none that offered hope. It was then that a junior archivist, a young Velthari named Kessa, who had been searching desperately through ancient records for any clue, rushed into the chamber without proper protocol. "Your Majesty, I may have found something," she exclaimed, holding up a data tablet with trembling hands. The guards moved to remove her for her breach of etiquette, but the Emperor raised his hand to stop them. "Speak," he commanded Kessa about quickly, and then began to explain what she had discovered. "I was searching through records from our earliest contact with primitive species, looking for any reference to unusual healing methods, and I found an entry about a species called humans. Several of the advisors scoffed at this, for humans were widely considered one of the least impressive species in the galaxy. With short lifespans and limited technology, and bodies that could not even survive in vacuum without artificial protection, what could humans possibly offer that we cannot?" demanded Archon Salith with obvious disdain. Kessa swallowed nervously but continued. "The records mention that humans practice something called music therapy, a healing method that uses sound and emotional resonance to treat conditions that do not respond to conventional medicine. And the report specifically notes that they have success with illnesses that seem to have no physical cause." The Emperor leaned forward on his throne, and for the first time in weeks, there was something other than despair in his eyes. "Emotional resonance?" he repeated, unfamiliar with the concept. "Yes, Your Majesty, and humans are apparently experts in the manipulation and expression of emotions, which they consider a strength rather than a weakness." Archon Salith stepped forward with his hands raised in protest. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot be considering this, for the humans are primitive and emotional and utterly lacking in the logical discipline that defines superior civilizations like our own." But the Emperor was no longer listening to his physician's objections, because he was a father watching his child die, and he would try anything, even the strange primitive practices of a species his people looked down upon. "Find me a human," he commanded, "and bring them here immediately. For I do not care how primitive they are if there is even the smallest chance they can save my daughter." The order went out across the stars that very hour, and a ship was dispatched to the human colonies on the fringe of known space. The Empire's greatest healers had failed, and now the fate of the princess rested on the shoulders of a species that most Velthari considered barely worth noticing. But desperation has a way of opening doors that pride keeps firmly closed, and the Emperor was desperate enough to try anything at all. Elena Vasquez had never expected to see an Imperial warship hovering above the refugee camp where she worked, and yet there it was, blocking out the sun like a mountain made of black metal and purple light. She had been in the middle of a session with a young girl who had lost her family in a colonial disaster, using her guitar to help the child express feelings she could not put into words. When the soldiers arrived, "You are Elena Vasquez, certified music therapist and trauma counselor?" the lead soldier asked, though it was clear from his tone that he already knew the answer. "I am," Elena replied, standing up slowly and positioning herself between the soldiers and the frightened children. "And whatever you want with me, these children have nothing to do with it." The soldier's expression did not change as he held out a datapad, displaying an official Imperial summons. "You have been requested by His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Kethvaros of the Velthari Empire, and you will come with us immediately." Elena stared at the summons in disbelief, because the Velthari were one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, and they had never shown any interest in humans, beyond occasional trade agreements and a general attitude of superiority. "There must be some mistake," she said. But the soldier shook his head. "There is no mistake, and the Emperor's orders are not negotiable. So you will gather whatever belongings you need and board our ship within the hour." Elena looked back at the children she had been helping, at the camp full of refugees who needed her, and her heart ached at the thought of leaving them, but she could see in the soldier's eyes that she had no choice. And so she said goodbye to her colleagues and promised the children she would return as soon as she could. The journey to Velthar took 3 days, and during that time no one would tell Elena why she had been summoned or what the Emperor could possibly want with a human music therapist when the ship finally emerged from hyperspace, and she saw the Velthari homeworld for the first time. She could not help but gasp at its beauty. The planet glowed with soft purple and blue light, and the cities on its surface looked like clusters of stars that had fallen from the sky. And the royal palace was a massive structure of polished obsidian that rose from the capital city, like a monument to power and elegance. Elena was escorted through halls of crystal and light, past Velthari nobles who stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disgust. She heard their whispers as she passed, comments about her small size and her strange soft skin and her lack of bioluminescence, and she tried not to let their contempt affect her. Finally, she was brought to a grand chamber where the Emperor himself sat on a throne of black crystal, his glow brighter than any Velthari she had seen yet, though there was something hollow in his eyes that spoke of deep exhaustion. "You are the human healer?" he asked, his voice echoing through the chamber. Elena bowed her head respectfully before answering, "I am a music therapist." "Your Majesty, though I am not sure why you have brought me here when your empire has access to the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy." A tall Velthari in elaborate robes stepped forward, and Elena could tell from his bearing that he was someone important. "I am Archon Silith, royal physician to His Majesty, and I must inform you that your presence here is highly irregular and not welcomed by the medical establishment." Elena met his cold gaze without flinching. "Then perhaps you could explain why I am here, since no one has told me anything." The Emperor raised his hand to silence. Archon Silith and spoke directly to Elena. "My daughter is dying, and every healer in the Empire has failed to save her. And your species was mentioned in our records as having unusual healing methods that might succeed where ours have not." Elena felt a chill run down her spine at the weight of responsibility being placed on her shoulders. "I am honored that you would consider me, Your Majesty, but I should tell you that music therapy is not a miracle cure, and I cannot promise that I can help your daughter without knowing what is wrong with her." The Emperor stood from his throne and walked toward her, his towering form casting a shadow over her small human body. "Come," he said simply, "and see for yourself." He led her through the palace to the royal medical chamber, where Princess Alicia lay in a bed surrounded by machines and monitors that beeped and hummed with data Elena could not understand, but she did not need to understand the machines to see that the child was dying. The princess was small and fragile, her crystalline skin almost translucent, and the glow that should have burned bright beneath her surface was barely visible, flickering weakly like the last ember of a dying fire. Elena approached the bed slowly and looked down at the child's face, seeing the dark circles under her closed eyes and the way her small chest barely rose and fell with each shallow breath. "What treatments have you tried?" she asked, and Archon Silith began reciting a list of procedures so complex and advanced that Elena could barely follow them. They had scanned every cell in the princess's body and found nothing wrong. They had searched her mind for trauma or damage and found only confusion. They had tried every medication and therapy known to Valthari science, and none of it had made any difference when the Archon finished his list. Elena asked a question that made everyone in the room fall silent. Has anyone talked to her about her mother? The Emperor and Archon Salith exchanged confused glances. What do you mean? The Emperor asked. Elena turned to face him, her expression gentle but serious. Your wife, the Empress, died 6 months ago, correct? The Emperor nodded stiffly, and Elena could see that even mentioning his wife caused him pain that he quickly suppressed. And did anyone help the princess process her grief? Talk to her about her feelings. Let her cry and mourn for her mother? The silence that followed told Elena everything she needed to know. Grief is not a medical condition, Archon Seleth said dismissively. And the princess completed the required mourning period along with the rest of the empire. Elena shook her head slowly, her heart breaking for the child lying in the bed. 3 days is not enough to mourn a mother. And grief is not something you can complete on a schedule, especially for a child who loved her mother and does not understand why she is gone. She looked at the Emperor, who seemed to be struggling with something he could not name. Your daughter is not sick in any way your technology can detect, because her body is not what is broken. And the pain she feels is in her heart and her spirit. The parts of her that loved her mother and do not know how to exist without her. Archon Silith scoffed openly at this explanation. You are suggesting that an emotion is killing the princess? That is absurd. But Elena stood her ground, because she had seen this before in human children. The way unexpressed grief could destroy a person from the inside out. I am suggesting that your daughter is dying because no one taught her that it is okay to feel sad, that no one held her while she cried, that no one told her that the pain in her heart is normal and that it will get better with time. She turned back to the Emperor and met his eyes directly. I may be able to help her, but I will need time alone with her, without machines and monitors and people watching our every move. Because healing this kind of pain requires trust and safety and honesty. The Emperor stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see the war raging behind his eyes between his pride and his desperation. Finally he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Save my daughter, and I will give you anything you ask for. Elena nodded and turned back to look at the dying princess, knowing that the hardest part of her journey was just beginning. The royal medical chamber fell silent as the last of the physicians and attendants filed out, leaving Elena alone with the dying princess. For the first time, Elena knew that hidden cameras still watched from somewhere, because no empire would leave their heir truly unmonitored. But at least the physical presence of all those skeptical eyes was gone. She pulled a small chair close to the princess's bed and sat down, taking a moment to simply look at the child before doing anything else. Alicia was beautiful, even in her fading state, her features delicate and graceful like all Valthari, and Elena could see traces of what must have been a radiant glow in the faint shimmer beneath her translucent skin. Hello, little one, Elena said softly, not knowing if the princess could hear her. My name is Elena, and I have come a very long way to meet you. There was no response, but Elena had not expected one. So she simply continued talking in the same gentle tone she used with all her young patients. I heard that you lost your mother, and I want you to know that I understand how much that hurts. Because I lost my grandmother when I was about your age, and she was the person I loved most in the whole universe. Still nothing. But Elena thought she saw a tiny flicker in the princess's glow. So faint she might have imagined it. She reached into the bag she had brought with her and pulled out a small instrument, a ukulele that she had carried with her across the galaxy because it was light and easy to transport and perfect for moments exactly like this. I'm going to play some music for you, she said, and you do not have to do anything at all. Just listen if you want to, or sleep if you prefer, because there is no right or wrong way to hear a song. Elena began to strum softly, playing a simple melody that she had learned from her grandmother many years ago. It was a lullaby, the kind of song that had been passed down through generations of humans, written to comfort children in the dark and remind them that they were loved and safe. The notes floated through the sterile chamber like tiny birds made of sound, filling the cold space with something warm and alive. And then Elena began to sing. Her voice was not particularly powerful or trained, just the voice of an ordinary human woman. But there was something in the way she shaped the words that carried more than just sound. She sang about loss and sadness, about the pain of missing someone who would never return. And as she sang, she watched the princess's face for any sign of response. It came slowly at first, just a trembling of the child's eyelids and a slight deepening of her shallow breathing. Then the princess's glow began to pulse, not strongly, but noticeably, flickering in rhythm with the melody like a heartbeat, learning to beat again. Elena kept singing, moving from the sad verses into the more hopeful ones, the parts of the lullaby that spoke about memories lasting forever and love never truly dying. And then the princess opened her eyes. They were large and luminous, the color of deep space filled with stars, and they stared at Elena with an intensity that made the human woman's heart skip a beat. "You feel it, do you not?" Elena asked softly, setting aside her ukulele. "The music goes to the place inside you that hurts." The princess's lips moved, dry and cracked from weeks of barely drinking. And Elena leaned closer to hear. "It hurts," Alicia whispered, and her voice was like wind through broken glass. "It hurts so much and no one understands." Elena felt tears prick at her own eyes, because she knew that pain. She had lived through it herself, and she had helped so many others live through it too. "I understand," she said, reaching out to take the child's small cold hand in her own warm one. "And I am going to tell you something that no one else has told you. Something very important that you need to hear." The princess's eyes focused on her face, desperate and afraid and somehow hopeful all at once. "The pain you feel is not wrong," Elena said firmly. "And it is not weakness, and it does not mean that something is broken inside you that needs to be fixed. Because the pain you feel is love." Alicia's brow furrowed in confusion. "I do not understand." Elena squeezed her hand gently and continued. "When we love someone very much and they go away, the love does not go away with them, and it stays inside us with nowhere to go. And that is what hurts. All that love looking for someone who is not there anymore." A single tear slipped from the corner of the princess's eye, the first tear she had cried since her mother died. Because Velthara children were taught from birth that tears were weakness and emotions were chaos. "My mother is gone," Alicia whispered, "and everyone acted like nothing happened after 3 days, and father never talks about her. And I felt so alone with all this pain inside me." Elena nodded, her own tears falling freely now. "Your people do not understand grief the way humans do, and they thought they were helping you by being strong and logical. But they did not know that you needed permission to be sad." She picked up her ukulele again and began playing another song, this one even softer than the first. "I am going to teach you something my grandmother taught me," she said, "and it is called mourning, which means letting the pain out instead of keeping it locked inside." Over the next hour, Elena taught the princess how to cry, how to talk about her mother, how to remember the happy times without feeling guilty for still being alive. She sang songs about loss and songs about hope. And with each song, the princess's glow grew a little stronger, pulsing in time with the music like a heart remembering how to beating the hidden observation room. The emperor watched with Archon Selith and several other officials, and what he saw made no sense to his logical mind. "The princess's vital signs are fluctuating wildly," Archon Selith reported, his voice tight with concern, "and her emotional readings are completely unstable." But the emperor was not looking at the data anymore. He was looking at his daughter's face, and for the first time in months, he saw something there that made his own suppressed Emotion surged. She was smiling, small and weak and wet with tears, but smiling nonetheless, and her glow was brighter now than it had been in weeks. Mother used to sing to me, Elisha told Elena. And I remember now, she would hold me at night and sing a song about the stars. Can you remember how it went? Elena asked gently. The princess closed her eyes and began to hum. And though the melody was different from any human song, Elena could hear the love woven into every note she picked up the tune on her ukulele, adding simple chords that complemented the alien melody. And together they played the song that the dead empress had once sung to her daughter in the observation room. The emperor turned away from the screen, his tall form trembling with something he had not allowed himself to feel in decades, because he remembered that song too. Remembered his wife singing it in the quiet hours of the night. Remembered how much he had loved her, and how quickly he had buried that love after her death. Your Majesty? Archon Selith asked, concerned by the emperor's strange behavior, but Kepharos could not answer, because for the first time since becoming emperor 200 years ago, he was crying, and he did not know how to stop back in the medical chamber. Elena finished the song and looked at the princess with wonder. The child's glow had doubled in strength in just 1 hour, and her eyes were bright and clear and alive in a way they had not been since her mother died. How do you feel? Elena asked. Elisha considered the question seriously before answering. It still hurts, she admitted, but it is a different kind of hurt now. Not a hurt that is killing me, but a hurt that reminds me my mother was real and that I loved her. Elena smiled and squeezed the child's hand. That is exactly right. And the hurt will get smaller over time. Not because you loved her less, but because you will learn to carry it better. The princess looked at Elena with something like wonder in her starlit eyes. Will you come back tomorrow and sing more songs? Elena laughed, a warm human sound that echoed strangely in the alien chamber. I will come back every day for as long as you need me, because we have a lot of healing to do together. And I think you are going to be just fine. And somewhere in the observation room, an emperor who had forgotten how to feel began the long journey of remembering. Word spread through the palace like fire through dry grass, whispered from servant to noble to official, until everyone knew that the human healer was succeeding where the empire's finest physicians had failed. Some spoke of it with wonder, amazed that such a primitive species could possess knowledge beyond Velthari understanding. But others spoke of it with fear and anger. Archon Selith stood before the Council of Traditions, his elegant robes flowing around him as he addressed the gathered elders with barely contained fury. What this human is doing to the princess is nothing short of emotional contamination, he declared, his glow pulsing red with agitation. And if we allow this to continue, we risk undoing 10,000 years of cultural evolution. The elders murmured among themselves, their ancient faces creased with concern. These were the keepers of Velthari tradition, beings who had lived for centuries and watched their civilization rise to greatness by mastering the chaos of emotion through logic and discipline. Explain what you mean by emotional contamination, demanded Elder Virus. The oldest and most respected member of the council, Archon Selith, brought up holographic recordings of Elena's sessions with the princess, and the council watched in horror as the child wept and laughed and expressed feelings that no proper Velthari would ever display. She is teaching the royal heir to embrace emotional instability, the Archon explained, to cry and rage and feel without restraint. And if the future empress rules with emotion rather than logic, our entire civilization could collapse. The council erupted in worried discussion, and by the end of the session, they had reached a decision that would be delivered to the emperor himself. Meanwhile, in the princess's chambers, Elena was teaching Elisha a clapping game that human children played, and the sound of their laughter echoed through the halls like music. You are getting so much better at this, Elena cheered as the princess successfully completed the pattern. Without making a mistake, Alicia's glow was now almost as bright as it had been before her illness, and her eyes sparkled with life and energy that had seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. "I like learning human things," the princess admitted, "and they make me feel happy in a way that Velthari lessons never did." Elena smiled, but also felt a twinge of concern, because she knew that not everyone in the palace was pleased with the princess's recovery. She had heard the whispers and seen the cold stares, and she knew that powerful forces were moving against her. That evening, the emperor summoned Elena to his private study, and when she arrived, she found him standing by a window, staring out at the lights of the capital city with a troubled expression. "The Council of Traditions has demanded your removal from the palace," he said without turning around. "And they claim that your methods are dangerous to Velthari culture, and that the princess's recovery is actually a corruption of her mind." Elena felt her heart sink, but she stood her ground. "Your Majesty, with respect, the council did not see your daughter dying for months while their approved methods failed, and they did not see the light return to her eyes when she finally had permission to feel her grief." The emperor turned to face her, and Elena was surprised to see conflict in his ancient eyes. "I know what you have done for my daughter. I am grateful beyond words, but I am also emperor, and I cannot simply ignore the concerns of the traditions that have guided our people for millennia." "Then what would you have me do?" Elena asked. The emperor sighed, a strangely human sound from such an alien being. "The council will convene tomorrow to formally decide your fate, and they have agreed to allow you one opportunity to defend your methods before they pass judgment." Elena nodded slowly, her mind already racing with possibilities. "And if I cannot convince them? Then you will be expelled from the empire, and the princess will be placed in the care of traditional healers who will undo everything you have taught her." The thought of Alicia being forced back into emotional suppression made Elena's blood run cold, and she knew she had to find a way to convince beings who had spent their entire lives rejecting the very thing she was trying to teach. The next day, Elena stood before the Imperial Council, a small human woman facing a chamber full of glowing beings who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "You have been given this opportunity to explain yourself," Elder Virus announced. "So speak now and tell us why we should allow you to continue corrupting our future Empress with your primitive practices." Elena took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Honored elders, I understand why my methods frighten you. Because for 10,000 years, your people have built a civilization on the belief that emotion is chaos and logic is strength." She paused to let her words settle before continuing. "But I have learned something in my time here that I do not think you have ever considered, and that is that emotion is not the opposite of logic. It is the fuel that gives logic meaning." Several elders scoffed at this, but Elder Virus raised a hand for silence. "Explain what you mean." "Human." Elena thought carefully about how to make beings of pure logic understand something they had rejected for millennia. "Your princess was dying, and all your logic could not save her, because her illness was not in her body but in her spirit. And the spirit does not respond to logic. It responds to connection and expression and love." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each elder in turn. "You suppress your emotions because you believe they make you weak. But I have seen the truth, and the truth is that suppression does not destroy emotion. It only buries it where it can poison you from within." Archon Celeste stood up angrily. "This is exactly the kind of dangerous thinking that will destroy our civilization." But Elena was not finished, and she did something that made the entire council fall silent. She began to sing. It was a simple melody, a human song about longing and loss and the hope that lives even in the darkest moments. And as she sang, something strange began to happen in the chamber. The elders, beings who had not felt true emotion in centuries, began to experience something they could not explain. Elder Virus felt a warmth in her chest that reminded her of a friend she had lost 300 years ago. A loss she had processed and filed away but never truly mourned. Another elder felt tears forming in his eyes and could not understand why. Only that the music seemed to reach into a place inside him that he had forgotten existed. Even Archon Selith found himself affected, his hostility melting into confusion as memories of his own buried griefs rose to the surface. Elena sang the last note and let the silence stretch out before speaking again. What you felt just now is what your princess was feeling every day for 6 months, with no way to release it and no one to help her understand it. And that is what was killing her. She looked at the Emperor, who sat on his throne with tears streaming down his glowing face. Your Majesty, I know you felt it too, because you love the Empress just as much as your daughter did. And you buried that love the same way your culture taught you to. The Emperor could not speak. So Elena continued, the Velthari are not weak for having emotions. You are strong for surviving so long while denying a fundamental part of your nature. But that survival came at a cost. And the cost was your ability to truly heal from loss. Elder Virus rose slowly to her feet. And when she spoke, her voice was different, softer and more uncertain than it had been before. I remember, she said quietly. I remember when my heart friend died, and I told myself I had processed the loss. But I never truly let her go. Other elders began to murmur similar revelations. Memories of losses they had buried rising up like ghosts, demanding to be acknowledged. Elena watched as the council transformed before her eyes. Ancient beings rediscovering something they had forgotten they possessed. I am not asking you to abandon your traditions, she said gently. I am asking you to add to them, to recognize that logic and emotion can exist together. And that true strength comes from being whole, rather than denying half of who you are. The Emperor stood from his throne and walked to Elena's side, facing the council with a presence that silenced the chamber. This human saved my daughter when all our wisdom failed, he declared. And today she has shown us something we have been too proud to see for 10,000 years. He placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, an unprecedented gesture of respect. The human stays, and her teachings will be studied rather than rejected. And any who oppose this decision may leave my empire and find another place to live. The council did not oppose him, because they could still feel the echoes of Elena's song in their hearts. And for the first time in millennia, they wondered what else they might have been missing. 1 year had passed since the day a human music therapist arrived at the Velthari Palace. And in that time, everything had changed. Princess Alicia stood before the great window of the royal audience chamber, a glow burning brighter than any royal child in recorded history. And she watched as ships from a dozen worlds descended toward the capital city. Today was the day of the Harmony Accord, a new treaty that would change the relationship between the Velthari Empire and humanity forever. Elena stood beside her young friend, dressed in elegant robes that the palace tailors had made specifically for her. And she still could not quite believe how far she had come from that refugee camp on the fringe of known space. Are you nervous? Alicia asked, her voice strong and confident in a way it never could have been a year ago. Lena laughed softly and shook her head. A little. But mostly I am proud of you, and proud of what we have accomplished together. The princess turned to face her with those starlit eyes that had once been so dull and lifeless. You saved my life, Elena, and not just my life, but my spirit. And I will never forget that no matter how long I live. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears that she did not try to hide. You saved yourself, little one. And all I did was show you that it was okay to feel. The doors of the audience chamber opened, and Emperor Kethvarus entered with a delegation of human diplomats following behind him. The Emperor was different now. Everyone in the Empire could see it. And the cold logical mask he had worn for 200 years had softened into something warmer and more Alive, he still ruled with wisdom and strength. But now there was compassion in his decisions, understanding in his judgments. And he had become a better leader for learning to feel again. "The delegations are ready," he announced. And there was a gentleness in his voice when he looked at his daughter that had not been there before. Audience chamber filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Beings of every shape and size who had come to witness something unprecedented in Imperial history. Among them were humans. Dozens of them, musicians and therapists and counselors who had been invited to establish the first emotional wellness exchange between their species and the Velthari. Elena took her place at a podium beside the Emperor's throne, her heart pounding as she prepared to address the assembly. "1 year ago," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I was brought to this empire because a child was dying, and no one could understand why." She looked at Alicia, who smiled at her with encouragement. The greatest healers in the galaxy had tried and failed, because they were looking for a disease when what they should have been looking for was a broken heart. The assembly listened in silence, captivated by this small human woman who had done the impossible. The Velthari taught themselves long ago to suppress their emotions, believing that logic alone was the path to strength. But they did not understand that by denying their feelings, they were also denying their ability to heal from loss and trauma. Elena paused to let her words settle. Humans have always known something that many species forget in their pursuit of advancement, and that is that our emotions are not weaknesses to be conquered, but strengths to be embraced. Because it is our ability to feel deeply that allows us to love deeply and to heal deeply. She gestured toward the human delegation. "The people I have brought with me today are experts in the art of emotional healing. Musicians who can reach the places that technology cannot touch. Counselors who can guide beings through the darkness of grief and trauma. Teachers who can show others how to feel without being destroyed by their feelings." The Emperor stood and addressed the assembly with authority. "The Velthari Empire has decided to establish a permanent exchange program with humanity, not for weapons or technology or military alliance, but for something far more valuable." He looked at Elena with respect that a year ago he would never have shown to any human. "We seek to learn the wisdom of emotion, the power of music, and the strength that comes from allowing ourselves to be vulnerable." A murmur ran through the assembly, and Elena could see beings from other species looking at the humans with new interest. If the mighty Velthari Empire was seeking knowledge from these small, soft creatures, perhaps humanity had something worth learning after all. Princess Alicia stepped forward, and the assembly fell silent at the sight of the royal heir. "I was dying," she said simply, "and everyone thought it was a disease, but it was grief. Grief for my mother that I had no way to express because no one had ever taught me how." She looked at Elena with love shining in her eyes. "This human woman taught me that it is okay to be sad, that tears are not weakness, that missing someone we love is not something to be ashamed of." She turned to face the assembly with a presence beyond her years. "She saved my life with a song, and now I want every being in the galaxy to have access to that same healing. Because no one should ever die from a broken heart when there are people who know how to help." The Emperor placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and for a moment they glowed together, father and child united in a way they had never been before. "Therefore," the Emperor announced, "I declare Elena Vasquez to be the first royal heart healer of the Velthari Empire, a position of honor never before given to any being outside our species." Elena felt her legs go weak with shock, but she managed to bow gracefully. "I am honored beyond words, Your Majesty." But the Emperor was not finished. "Furthermore, I announce the construction of the first Galactic Academy of Emotional Wellness, to be built on Velthar and staffed by healers from every willing species, with humans serving as the primary instructors." The assembly erupted in applause, and Elena saw the human diplomats looking at each other in amazement. For centuries humanity had been considered a minor species, primitive and emotional and barely worth noticing by the great civilizations of the galaxy now. They were being recognized as masters of something that even the most advanced technology could not replicate. After the ceremony, Elena stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching the sun set in a blaze of purple and gold. Alicia found her there, slipping her small hand into Elena's larger one. "What are you thinking about?" the princess asked. Elena smiled and squeezed her hand. "I am thinking about how strange life can be. How a song learned from my grandmother somehow ended up changing the fate of an empire." Alicia nodded thoughtfully. "My mother would have liked you, I think, and she would have been glad that you came." Elena felt tears forming and let them fall. "I think she would have liked you too. Little one, the you that you are now, strong and kind and unafraid to feel." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Elena knew, other beings were suffering the way Alicia had suffered. Trapped in grief they did not know how to express, dying slowly from wounds that no scanner could detect. But now there was hope. A bridge being built between species that could bring healing to the far corners of the galaxy, and it had all started with a single song. A simple lullaby that a human grandmother had sung to her granddaughter, passed down through generations until it reached across the stars to save a dying princess. That evening in the palace, as the celebrations continued below, Elena sat with Alicia in the princess's chambers and played her ukulele while the child fell asleep. She sang the same lullaby she had sung that first day, the song that had started everything. And as she sang, she thought about how much had changed since then. The Volthuri were learning to feel again, and humanity was being recognized for something other than their primitive technology. And across the galaxy, beings were beginning to understand that true strength was not the absence of emotion, but the courage to face it. And in the quiet of that room, with a sleeping princess and a sky full of stars, Elena knew that this was only the beginning, because music had a way of spreading, of reaching hearts that logic could not touch. And the melody that had saved one royal child would echo through the stars until every being in the galaxy knew that they did not have to suffer alone. The Empire's greatest healers had failed, but a human melody had succeeded. And that was a truth that would change everything. Elena played the last note and smiled at the sleeping child. "Sweet dreams, little one," she whispered, "and may your light never fade again." Outside the window, the stars seemed to shimmer in response, as if the universe itself was singing along. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, a new era was beginning, one song at a time.